Well, let's discuss this further now and cross live to our guest, Martin Jay, award-winning journalist who's based in the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Mr. Jay, good to see you. Thanks for coming on the programme. Now, we're getting conflicting reports from Iraq now, aren't we? The federal police say they've halted all combat operations, while the military reportedly denies it. This is quite concerning, given that it seems like they're having a lack of agreement on this very important matter. Do you think there's a similar lack of coordination when it comes to combat decisions?
I don't know if there's a lack of coordination, but I certainly think the Americans and the Iraqi forces and all the relevant commanders on the ground need to get together and rethink the strategy. The number of civilian casualties in the last few days has reached a pinnacle, and something which has gone beyond the point now of, I think, acceptability. I mean, in war zones, you always factor in the number of civilians caught in the middle, but I think we've gone beyond that point now, and it's getting quite worrying.
Now, if the decision to halt operations is confirmed, why do you think it's taken only now, considering weeks of reports of civilian casualties from the operation?
Well, I don't think there were so many reports. I think that was one of the main problems. I mean, on the ground right now, colleagues are telling me that Iraqi forces are not really rolling their sleeves up and really getting involved in hand-to-hand combat. And I think that's one of the main problems. It's a military strategy. Most of the Iraqi forces are really essentially just waiting for the US airstrikes to do their work. And I think probably that's got to change. Now, as a consequence of the bombing and the army not really engaging in street battles, inevitably, sooner or later, Western journalists, even those reluctant to report on the real story, on the number of civilian deaths, sooner or later those journalists have to report the facts on the ground. And I think that's what we've seen recently in the last few days, certainly from Friday, is that what else the journalists got to report other than the big story, which is civilian casualties.
Absolutely. We've been reporting here widely how the mainstream media have been mostly praising the success of the operation in Mosul, but barely touching on the subject of civilian suffering there. And then since yesterday, after the UN expressed its grave concern over the reports of the 200 civilian casualties in one single airstrike, should we expect the mainstream media to change their tune?
I think they'll have to, because they've already set the agenda now. Those readers and viewers in the West and around the world now have realized that what's going on in Mosul, in Western Mosul, is a rather different campaign to what we saw previously in Eastern Mosul. We now have to see a different strategy from the Iraqis, and I think they'll be looking at ways of intensifying infantry, I mean, hand-to-hand fighting with their soldiers. Don't forget they've got 100,000 soldiers there, which is a good-sized contingent. We'll be looking now for a different strategy from them, how to flush out ISIS, how to get more civilians out, so that they'll be in a position at some point to create a killing zone. We've heard reports also of some commanders talking about a second front. That's inevitable. I think that's going to happen. We're waiting with bated breath now to see whether something can come from all this. And who knows what will happen in the future.
Indeed. What kind of tactics do you think would be most effective in driving Islamic State out of the city?
Well, I think they've got to look at ways of separating civilians and extremist fighters, and that's going to be quite difficult. But sooner or later, it'll have to be quite messy work, and the infantry soldiers that aren't doing the job now will have to go in hand to hand and actually fight in very, very close proximities. Don't forget, Western Mosul is an old town. There's lots of tiny, narrow alleyways and narrow streets, perfect for insurgents to hide and to take advantage. But I think the Iraqi forces will go ahead with their second front idea. I think they'll try and reduce the airstrikes in the future. We'll see a new campaign to attack these fighters head on. And it may well involve a concentration of fighting. You know, when you have a large army on one side and a group of insurgents on the other, it's quite easy to concentrate the fighting around the clock, 24 hours, changing cycles of different units fighting the insurgents to flush them out, to tire them and exhaust them. And one other idea also is if you can create avenues of escaping civilians, then creating a situation whereby electricity and water is cut off and a besieging situation then follows is one avenue that I think those commanders will be looking at now as well.
Mr. Martin Jay, Beirut-based journalist, award-winning journalist, I might add. Thank you very much for your time on RT International. We appreciate it.